you very much everyone for attending early. I hope you would kindly wait until our event starting at 9:30 a.m. Thank you.
Good morning from Knoxville, Tennessee. On October 22nd, I'll be participating in a webinar sponsored by the Center for Business and Diplomatic Studies International Relations Department at BINUS University. The webinar will address the upcoming presidential election in the United States and the worldviews and foreign policies of President Donald Trump and his Democratic Party challenger, Joe Biden. Please join me for a discussion about the U.S. role in the Indo-Pacific and how that role may differ depending on the outcome of the U.S. presidential election. I'm looking forward to seeing you all on Zoom on October 22nd.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Perkasa Drajat and I'm the head of the Center of Policy Analysis and Development for American and European Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. In the webinar, we are going to discuss about the upcoming US election. As seen on the respective campaigns, the two presidential candidates present different visions in how the US should play its role in international relations. I'm going to touch upon on how the election may shape the US foreign policy, especially on how the US sees Southeast Asia and Indonesia. I'm looking forward to the webinar and I hope to see you there.
Good morning from Knoxville, Tennessee. On October 22nd, I'll be participating in a webinar sponsored by the Center for Business and Diplomatic Studies International Relations Department at BINUS University. The webinar will address the upcoming presidential election in the United States and the worldviews and foreign policies of President Donald Trump and his Democratic Party challenger, Joe Biden. Please join me for a discussion about the U.S. role in the Indo-Pacific and how that role may differ depending on the outcome of the U.S. presidential election. I'm looking forward to seeing you all on Zoom on October 22nd.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Perkasa Drajat and I'm the head of the Center of Policy Analysis and Development for American and European Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. In the webinar, we are going to discuss about the upcoming US election. As seen on the respective campaigns, the two presidential candidates present different visions in how the US should play its role in international relations. I'm going to touch upon on how the election may shape the US foreign policy, especially on how the US sees Southeast Asia and Indonesia. I'm looking forward to the webinar and I hope to see you there.
Before we starting the event, please do share your moment in this webinar with us by tagging our Instagram at @ir_BINUS on your post. Thank you. Once again, before the event start, please do share your moment in this webinar with us by tagging our Instagram at IR_BINUS, hashtag CBDS, hashtag IRLS, hashtag USFP in SEA, hashtag US election. And our webinar will be start in 3 minutes. Thank you. Hello, good morning, our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the U.S. Post-Election Foreign Policy in Southeast Asia webinar that is held today on 22nd October 2020. My name is Emily Rustania, International Relations student of BINUS University. I am having the honor to serve you as Master of Ceremony for this exciting webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that this webinar is initiated by Center for Business and Diplomatic Studies, CBDS, and supported by BINUS University, and proudly presented to you to celebrate the 40 years of BINUS University of empowering society and building the nation. CBDS, as the part of the International Relations Department of BINUS University, aims to undertake and promote research and deliberation on diplomacy, business, international relations, and developmental issues, particularly in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and Asia Pacific. By this event, CBDS commits to build, connect, and share research and other kinds of knowledge-generating activities for the betterment of life of the people and the earth. Ladies and gentlemen, joining with us in this webinar are our special guests and our distinguished speakers. I'm pleased to welcome Vice Rector of Research and Technology Transfer of BINUS University, who is also Executive Director of CBDS, Professor Tirta Nugraha Mursitama. Good morning, Professor Tirta.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, Brandon and Paben. How are you?
Good morning, Prof. Tirta. How are you? Long time no see.
Yes, yeah, okay. I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All heads of Department of BINUS University, good morning and thank you for attending this webinar. We will also welcome our moderator, Ms. Dayu Nirma Amurwanti, distinguished lecturer and also faculty member at International Relations Department of BINUS University. She has an extensive experience in public policy and economic by training. Good morning, Ms. Dayu.
Very good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Ms. Dayu. Our warmest welcome is conveyed to our keynote speakers, Professor from the University of Tennesse-Knoxville, USA, Professor Brandon Prins. Glad to have you with us, Professor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Professor. And finally, we welcome the head of Center for Policy Analysis and Development for America and Europe at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Ben Perkasa Drajat. Glad to have you with us, Dr. Ben.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Professor Prins.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening here.
Good evening, USA.
So, thank you to all participants. We also acknowledge BINUS Student University, lecturers, BINUS University, representative Ministry of Foreign Affairs, participants from numerous universities, lecturers of various universities, and also journalists who also attending with us in this exciting and timely event. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand for our distinguished guests and to everyone who have attended this webinar by clicking the reaction buttons on your screen. Ladies and gentlemen, for your information, there will be a barcode for BINUSian and a link for non-BINUSian that you must fill in the order to acquire your certificate in the last of the event. Once again, in the ending of the event. Thank you. Now, before we begin, I would like to invite Vice Rector of Research and Technology Transfer of BINUS University, who is also Executive Director of CBDS, Professor Tirta Nugraha Mursitama, to deliver his opening remarks.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, Professor Prins. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May God always bless you and peace upon all of us. First of all, I would like to welcome Professor Brandon Prins from the University of Tennesse-Knoxville, USA. I think the time has come for you, okay? We invited you previously and now it's time to having you here. I'm very glad to having you here. And then welcome also to my senior, Dr. Ben Perkasa Drajat, who has been my mentor, one of my mentor. Yeah. Since I undergraduate, and actually we both of us has been trained by Japanese universities. So I hope we share the common knowledge, common spirit and effort. And I highly respect to Dr. Drajat. And also to all the faculty members and head of Department of International Relations, Dr. Ranga, and moderator, Mbak Dayu, and everyone who is attending this webinar or guest lecture, and also to journalists. And I have one of old colleague as well, Mbak Eva, who is now a journalist in Voice of America. Mrs. Eva is also joining this webinar, and hopefully she can also share or maybe can get benefit from this event. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the BINUS University, of course, we are very happy and very grateful to have or to attend this kind of lecture series, international relations lecture series. In my personal point of view, has been very emotional attraction for me, or attachment, because I've been with the international relations department, Professor Prins. I'm a IR faculty member, so this is definitely one of my discipline. So I'm very interested to joining this event. The IR lecture series has been conducted, I think, since 12 years ago. So hopefully it will make Department of International Relations become one of the best international relations department in Indonesia, and Center for Business and Diplomatic Studies, one of the vehicle in department level, could be example in conducting research, consultancy, publication related to the international relations discipline. So I strongly encourage all the faculty members and also all the students to join the activities of the center. Second of all, the topic itself, the US election, it becomes more interesting and become more hot topic all over the world. We know that Trump, on the other hand, and also Biden is the competing each other, but in a different way. Therefore, we would like to know, we would like to understand the perspective from Professor Prins as a U.S. citizens, and then we get to know how the U.S. sees the election. And of course, from Dr. Drajat, we would like to hear about how the U.S. election can impact to the Indonesian foreign policy, for example, and how we may predict, or we may respond to the whoever candidate will be the next U.S. president in the United States, because we believe for students of IR who is attending these lectures, that whoever appointed as a U.S. president definitely will affect the international relations all over the world, and including to our country, Indonesia. This is a very precious moment for us, so I encourage all the students to raise question or comment to the both speakers, Professor Prins and Dr. Drajat. I think I don't want to take the longer time for all of you, and by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I officially open this lecture series and enjoy the series. And once again, thank you, Professor Prins and Dr. Drajat. Enjoy the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opening speech, Professor Tirta. And once again, welcome to the U.S. Post-Election Foreign Policy in Southeast Asia webinar. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I now welcome our moderator for this event, Ms. Dayu Nirma Amurwanti. Please give a round of applause for Ms. Dayu. Hello, Ms. Dayu, how are you?
Hello, thank you, Emily. I hope everyone is staying safe and well. Emily reminds me of two series, right? In my generation, there's currently a series on Emily Dickinson, a great American poet. But I'm sure your generation is more familiar with Lily Collins' Emily in Paris. Anyways, setting that aside. A very good morning and good evening to Professor Brandon Prins. I hope everyone is staying safe. I'd like to reiterate our warmest welcome to this discussion. It is titled The U.S. Post-Election Foreign Policy in Southeast Asia. It is organized by the Center of Business and Diplomacy Studies, International Relations Department of Bina Nusantara University. And it's also part of, as Professor Tirta has mentioned, International Relations Lecture Series. And we are proud to present this for two reasons. We'd like to present and offer a very topical discussion and analysis that is on top of everyone's mind. And today, it's very timely because in 2 weeks, we'll have the US elections. So we'll hear from our two distinguished speakers for the day, what are the implications to our region, how different the two foreign policy visions of the two candidates are. And it's also our intention to bring to you 2 points of view or 2 perspectives, one from academia who has done extensive research on the topic, and one from a practitioner who really understands the day-to-day implications to the work of diplomacy, for example. And for the audience, I'd like to greet and say hello to everyone. We have a very diverse audience today, almost 400 turnout. So I'm very happy. I think we're all very happy with the turnout today. And if you would like to have a say and have your voice heard on the topic, don't forget to tag us. And the hashtags are CBDS, IRLS, and US election without S because it's 1,000 mentions more. So let me introduce briefly our two speakers for the day. We have Professor Brandon Prins of University of Tennesse-Knoxville, United States. He's also the lead co-editor of International Studies Quarterly. His focus of research and teaching spans around conditions associated with political violence, including interstate and civil war, terrorism, maritime policy. A book-length manuscript is on its way in the making at the Oxford University Press on political geography of modern maritime piracy. Our second speaker is Dr. Ben Perkasa Drajat. If he is Professor Tirta Senior and Professor Tirta is my senior, he is mega or super senior. And he is from the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He is the head of Center for Policy Analysis and Development for America and Europe. And the center is responsible for developing foreign policy, technical policy assessment, and coordinate foreign policy implementation in the regions of America and Europe at the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So with that introduction, let's talk about our topic of the day. Now, everyone in the world is preoccupied with 2 things. One is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, which is very unfortunate. But 2, even though the US citizens are actually very occupied and very busy with, or very anxious, I should say, or even excited of the elections, the world is watching very closely because these 2 candidates are the opposite in the spectrum. And this may have different implications for Southeast Asia as a region and for Indonesia as a nation. And there are some questions that came across our minds, of course. The question is, will the US put America first, or will it assume or resume, I should say, leadership in key global issues such as climate change? Will it, take charge in multilateral institutions and the issues that they advocate? The second question is, will it continue to stay transactional as the current regime is approaching issues, especially in Southeast Asia? And if it continues to be transactional, what are the priorities? What are we offering in terms of trade, in terms of security, in terms of geopolitics, and what are the implications in terms of aid, in terms of engagement with the region and with Indonesia? With that, let me greet Professor Brandon Prins. Hello, Professor.
Hey, good morning. Thank you very much.
Good morning, good evening. Thank you so much for staying up so late for the discussion.
Yeah, of course. I'm very excited to be here.
So allow me to mention that you will have 20 minutes for your presentation, and we'll follow with 30 minutes of Q&A. And for the audience, please feel free to type in your question at the chat box anytime throughout the presentation, and I will try my best to summarize and read them out during the question and answer session. So with that, Professor Brandon.
Thank you very much, Professor Armoanti. Can I share my screen? I have a few slides. Is that okay? I'll try.
Yes, the committee will help. There you go.
Okay, so people can see this? Okay, let me just see if I can get this on. Okay, I don't have much, but I thought I would put a few things up just to guide my comments and discussion just a little bit. So I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really excited to talk to you about the U.S. role in the Indo-Pacific, and of course the kind of worldviews and foreign policy positions of President Donald Trump and his Democratic Party challenger, Joe Biden. Now, obviously, the United States has been involved in Asia for a very long period of time. In fact, the first U.S. flagged ship that went to Asia went in 1784, and the United States has been deeply involved in the Asian space ever since that period of time. And obviously, trading relationships were always important and continue to be important to the United States and connect the United States to Asia quite deeply. Now, clearly after World War II, the United States became even more involved in the Asian space. But the objective of the United States has largely been the same for a long period of time, which is basically to prevent the emergence of a regional hegemon. And that has guided US foreign policy for a very long period of time. Now, let me just note a couple things before getting to differences between President Trump and his Democratic Party challenger, Joe Biden. So obviously the Indo-Pacific, the Asian space is extremely important to the United States economically, right? So more than 40% of US trade in goods is in countries in Asia. Obviously, Asia hosts 9 of the 10 busiest seaports in the world, right? As Rose George wrote in her book, 90% of Everything, 90% of goods flows through ocean spaces on large cargo ships, many of those that are transiting the Asian maritime space through critical choke points in the Malacca Straits around Singapore. Obviously, more than 50% of global maritime traffic occurs in the Asian maritime space. Lots of US exports flow to APEC countries. Trade with Asia supports millions of jobs in the United States. There's tremendous amount of US foreign direct investment in Asia. In fact, it's been estimated that there's something like 2018 or 19, 1.3 trillion US dollars that are invested in the Asian maritime space, which is more than China, Japan's, and South Korea's combined. So obviously, China is investing considerable sums in Asia, but also in Africa. But the United States also has tremendous investments in the Asian maritime space. And of course, there are critical resources that are found in Asia that are extremely important to the US economy because of their relevance to important products, especially in electronics. Now, if Asia is important economically to the United States, it also is important politically to the United States as well. And US security, political elites in the United States see US security in part determined by what happens in the Indo-Pacific. So Asia hosts 7 of the world's 10 largest standing armies. Asia is home to some of the most enduring territorial disputes, including the Kuriles, the Senkakus, the Paracels, the Spratlys. There are obviously territorial disputes that are on land, they're also quite relevant, such as Kashmir between India and Pakistan and Aksai Chin between India and China. There are obviously 5 nuclear powers that exist and coexist in the Asian maritime space, including India, Pakistan, Russia, North Korea, and China. And of course, the United States is interested and concerned about events that go on in the Asian space, including political violence and terrorism, resource competition among states in the Indo-Pacific, and transnational crime as well. These are just figures that I put together for some other projects that just kind of visualize some of the competitions that exist in the Asian maritime space. So one shows amount of terrorism in certain countries, terrorist incidents in 4 countries in the Indo-Pacific, and the other visualizes the amount of maritime piracy that's seen, the amount of violent crime that's seen, blue dots and the green dots, some political violence that's happening, obviously in places such as India and the Philippines. And the United States is involved in the Indo-Pacific in part because of some of these forces that are going on. Now, the United States obviously has deep relationships with countries in the Indo-Pacific. It has long-term alliances with countries such as Japan since 1960, a defense alliance that was signed with South Korea after the Korean War in 1953. It's had, actually, its longest alliance partner has been with the Philippines since basically after the Spanish-American War in 1898. It has close defense cooperation with Australia. It has a strong relationship, security relationship, even if unofficial, with Taiwan. And it's growing its security relationship with Thailand as well. It has additional security relationships with New Zealand that have been longstanding. The nuclear issue has created some tension between the United States and New Zealand, but that largely has kind of been smoothed over, and that relationship has improved. And then, of course, the United States also has a growing security relationship with Singapore, in which Singapore allows access to certain facilities for US military forces. And I think actually Singapore has the only berth available for a US carrier in parts of Southeast Asia. The United States also has growing relationships with India, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and of course the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which was kind of renewed and re-upped in 2017, has been an important forum for addressing economic cooperation and security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Now, before we again get to Biden and Trump, the United States has been pivoting to Asia for quite some time. It was one of the signature policies of the Obama administration, and it coincided with a worldview that Obama had that was kind of situated in the Pacific. Recall that Barack Obama was born in Hawaii. He spent some time as a child in Indonesia. He was connected to Asia, and he saw Asia as being critically important in the 21st century to US economic and security interests. And he really had just modest goals of shifting US attention to Asia. And that meant for him really engaging China. It meant, if he was going to engage China, strengthening the alliance with Japan. And both of those things would hopefully help address the North Korean nuclear issue. And then, of course, another aspect of his agenda was to reevaluate free trade agreements, which he tried to do without a lot of success, but he was successful in terms of getting the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, worked out, even if Trump pulled out of it. Now, all of these efforts ran into significant problems, right? And they ran into problems for a variety of reasons. One of the problems that he had in terms of his ability to engage China was one of the first things that China did was to wreck the global climate agreement in Copenhagen and embarrass President Obama, which soured relationships. China, of course, then initiated or proceeded to launch what was a set of territorial claims in the South China Sea that also frustrated relationships with the United States. There were leadership changes in Japan that put progressive prime ministers in power that opposed the status of forces agreement and kind of set back cooperative relationship with actions in Afghanistan, in Iraq. And then, of course, North Korea presented significant problems for Obama when he was in office. It tested nuclear weapons, I think, 3 times, proceeded to test ballistic missiles many times, and of course, engaged in skirmishes with South Korean military forces in 2010 and 2011, I think. Right. But again, Obama did give more attention to Asia. He traveled to Asia 11 times, I believe. And he really tried to push the United States toward the Asian maritime space. Just going to check on my time here. Now, in thinking about the kind of worldviews of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, there are a couple of things that I think stand out, right? So Trump came to office seeing, I think, 3 problems in the world for the United States. One was radical Islam, which was perceived as a problem by many political elites in the United States, and certainly was seen as a problem and a focus of the Bush 43 administration and the Obama administration as well. So that was one thing that Trump saw as a core problem facing the United States. Second was Trump was convinced that previous administrations had signed terrible trade deals for the United States. They were not in the interest of U.S. businesses and U.S. workers, and so he wanted to address that problem quite significantly. And then third, he saw a problem with immigration, and he wanted to address that. So those are the 3 kind of general problems Trump saw coming into office. Now, his worldview is basically America first, as Professor Amawanti noted, right? And this is kind of centered on 4 pillars. Now, America first does mean, of course, removing the United States from a whole host of multilateral organizations, right? So Trump removed the United States from the World Health Organization. It removed the United States from the Human Rights Council. It threatened to remove the United States from the World Trade Organization. It has ended a variety of agreements like the TPP. It renegotiated NAFTA. So it certainly, America First has meant for Trump getting rid of many of these international obligations and focusing intently on U.S. economic interests, right? And so this first pillar of economic nationalism has really meant focusing on what is going to benefit the United States, and free trade isn't necessarily always benefiting the United States. And this has certainly meant a tariff battle, a tariff war with China over the relationship between the United States and China. So a second pillar has been extreme homeland security, which has, of course, meant kind of walling off the United States, and that actually literally building a wall to prevent those from getting into the United States, and imposing basically barriers to people actually immigrating to the United States and migrants from actually coming to the United States. So really kind of walling off the United States from foreigners as much as Trump could do with executive orders. There also has been this amoral transactionalism, which basically means the United States under the Trump administration has not been concerned about who the United States is involved with economically or politically. It didn't matter if that leader was an autocrat or a Democrat. It didn't matter if that regime we were dealing with was an autocracy, a dictatorship, or a democracy. What mattered was what that country, what that regime, what that leader was going to give to Donald Trump and to the United States. And so there was no concern about whether or not this was a right transaction. It was just a transaction that was in the benefit or the interest of the Trump administration or the United States. And then, of course, there is a pillar of militarism. Now, despite Trump thinking that the United States has fought like Obama, stupid wars, and we need to remove ourselves from many of these places, that it has not been in the interest, that we've wasted money in places such as Afghanistan and Iraq. He has certainly spent a lot of money on the military. This figure actually just shows the military budget of the United States in constant 2018 dollars. And obviously the budget went down under Obama and actually has significantly increased again under the Trump administration. And it's not only been an increase in military spending, it's also meant the development of new weapon systems that Trump finds appealing, even if those weapon systems may in fact damage relationships abroad, right? So the United States is working on new nuclear weapons, and it also is working on perfecting hypersonic weapons that both China and Russia are developing as well. Now, Biden's worldview is quite different. He clearly is a liberal internationalist. He's more similar to Obama, even if he has some differences as well. Now, Obama basically had kind of 4 pillars to his kind of worldview or his kind of foreign policy. One was reducing the US footprint abroad. And after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the American people were certainly ready for reducing America's footprint in the world and bringing America home from those conflicts. He wanted to pivot to Asia, as we've talked about. He wanted to work with allies, and Obama also wanted to share responsibilities in global governance with many other important countries around the world. Biden largely shares many of these same principles. He is pro-alliances, he's pro-multilateralism, he's pro-institutionalism, he's certainly pro-democracy, and lastly, he does want, like Obama, to expand the security portfolio, right? So if Trump dismisses climate change as a hoax or fake science or something that is not going to happen, Biden clearly sees climate change as a critical threat and of great interest to the United States, and something that needs to be addressed by the United States, and that climate change will not really fundamentally be addressed unless the United States is actually taking an active part. But he also sees other issues like Obama did as well that are also important, be it poverty, be it pandemic disease, that these also would be issues that a Biden administration would likely focus on. Now, what about the Indo-Pacific? So obviously, Trump has done a number of things to engage countries in the Indo-Pacific. He's obviously confronted China over economic abuses, including what was intellectual property theft, that has included currency manipulation and the trade deficit. He obviously wants to protect American workers. He wants to rebuild manufacturing back in the United States, particularly in critical industries that are useful for defense, such as steel and aluminum. He obviously has tried to prevent China from obtaining or purchasing assets in the United States. And he has shown some concern, although his policies haven't really addressed it, wage stagnation and inequality in the United States as well, right? He tried to address North Korea with direct diplomacy with Kim Jong-un. He obviously has been trying to get out of Afghanistan because he's tired of the conflict. The United States is tired of the conflict. The Taliban are tired of the conflict. Everybody seems tired of the conflict in Afghanistan, and he's trying to remove the United States from that space. He did sign a trade deal with South Korea, and Trump does, at least through the Department of Defense, continue to build partnerships with countries in Asia. Now, again, he's made a lot of mistakes, and we can talk about some of those. But let me just turn to Biden, because I think that one of the things that Biden simply wants to do, and will probably be a slogan Biden has, is just a return to normalcy, right? That is, don't be erratic. I mean, one of the problems of the Trump administration has been a lack of expertise in critical institutional roles in foreign policy in his administration, a lack of consistency in what the administration actually wants to accomplish and what it wants to do. I also think that Biden will confront China, but likely it will confront China with allies. Although Biden would likely try to reduce or try to end the tariff wars with China, clearly would like to sign trade deals with Asian countries and maybe even try to rejoin the TPP. I would expect continued diplomacy with North Korea, but I don't expect kind of direct individual presidential summits between a President Biden and Kim Jong-un. And then, of course, he also would continue to expand partnerships in Asia. So let me just end with this, and I've probably gone too long as it is. I do think that the U.S. strategy going forward is, of course, to win back support from Asians for U.S. leadership. And that has meant that there isn't a lot of confidence right now among elites, political elites in the Asian space for the Trump administration. In fact, former President, Prime Minister Mahathir in Malaysia asked President Trump to resign, thinking his administration has not done well in the Asian space. There's probably going to be a push for collective security among Asia Pacific nations, regardless of who wins office. There will obviously be more multilateral economic efforts if Biden wins. And I do think that going forward, there needs to be a recognition that most countries in the Indo-Pacific don't really want to be forced to choose between the United States or China, and that their policies have clearly demonstrated kind of a hedging, which is working with China on a long number of different dimensions and working with the United States as well. Let me stop there, and I can take questions as we move forward.
Thank you. We haven't had questions in the chat box. So I'll encourage our audience, I believe there are close to 600 now, to type in their questions in the chat box. But let me begin with, are you allowed to, Professor Brennan, are you allowed to give us a guesstimate of who is going to win in the elections? because we have heard that everyone is so excited. There's a very good turnout, for example, in the early elections, in the early ballots. So also the other question is, just to begin, what does it mean for multilateral institutions such as the World Bank or WHO if either one wins? And let me read out, we have questions now. Let me read out a question from Ratika Binawa from Perth. Her question is, if Beijing invades Taiwan, oh my God, that's that is rather serious. Will either, this is hypothetical, I hope, will either Trump or Biden provide support to Taiwan directly? And how will he, if Biden is elected, how will he view relationship between Beijing and Taiwan, and whether there will be changes? And there is another question from our student, Marvel Nivander. If Donald Trump's vision is for the US to pull out or withdraw from various conflicts because he thought that that's not a wise use of taxpayers' money, will that be the same for Biden? Because, you know, after the pandemic, the US will be busy with economic recovery. That is normal for any president to assume that they have to consider any foreign policy interventions very strategically. And we have from our professor, Pa Tangguh Khairil. We have, I'm not sure if you're aware that we have a Minister of Defense, Prabowo Subianto, who has passed human rights record, I should say. I hope that's diplomatic enough. And in the past, there has never been any president who has allowed him to enter the United States. And President Trump, as you have stated, he doesn't consider morality of things, but rather, you know, how does that benefit the US? And he is probably the first president who will allow General Prabowo Subianto to enter US soil. So perhaps if you can share your views on that. The other is on trade. With the, if Trump gets reelected and his current views on trade and US becoming increasingly nationalistic and isolationist, do you think that the US will lose out in the end? So I'll probably should stop there. That's a lot of questions for you already. So Professor Brandon.
Yeah. Thank you for all those questions. So I always hesitate to prognosticate about the outcome of a U.S. presidential election because I would have thought that in 2016 the outcome would have been quite different. I mean, I will say that Nate Silver, who runs a website, he's a statistician who runs a website, 538. He estimates right now that the probability of Biden winning the presidential election is right around 87 out of 100. So all of the polls right now, if we can believe the polls, and I do think pollsters have revised their polling strategy after the 2016 election. So my expectation is that those polls and those pollsters are gauging accurately or more accurately than in 2016 public opinion in the United States, that the likelihood is that there's a Biden victory. Now again, a Biden is ahead by 8, 9, 10, 11 points in the national, but of course we have this damn electoral college and you have to do it state by state, which is crazy. The polls are closer when you look at state by state. But again, even in those states that Trump won last time, the Wisconsins and the Michigans and the Pennsylvanias, Biden is ahead. So I do think there is the chances are that Biden is, I think that's probably the most likely outcome as a Biden victory. And I will say where I am in Knoxville, which is a reliably red state, and there are lots of Trump supporters, I have tried to go vote now 5 times, and the lines are so long that I drive away. They are hours and hours long, and I simply don't have time because my kid has to get to soccer or something else. So I can't wait for 2 or 3 or 4 hours to vote. So I keep trying every day I go, and I try and see if I can get myself in there. But and that certainly has never happened since I have been here. So that's certainly a new phenomenon. There is tremendous excitement about the election and an expectation. Now, in terms of some of the other questions about a potential Biden policy, I do think that Biden will be more favorable toward multilateral organizations and intergovernmental organizations. I think he would strengthen U.S. commitments and partnerships with these organizations. He would see, like Obama, these organizations as being critical to supporting U.S. economic and political and security interests. So I'm sure he would rejoin the World Health Organization. He would rejoin the Human Rights Council. There's no possible way that a Biden presidency would pull out of the WTO. And so there would be more active engagement with the international community and our European and Asian partners in trying to solve economic and political problems and govern collectively. So I do expect that more likely to happen under a Biden presidency. Again, a Trump presidency, second term, I can certainly see the United States pulling out of the WTO, remaining out of the WHO, staying out of the Human Rights Council, and perhaps pulling out of a whole host of other IGOs that the Trump administration and some neoconservatives that might be in his cabinet think are useless or unimportant to achieving U.S. security interests, right? Now, I think the relationship between Beijing and Taiwan, between China and Taiwan, the United States does largely have a defense pact with Taiwan that largely, I think, would mean the United States would come to the aid of Taiwan if there was a conflict between mainland China and Taiwan. I do think the United States would honor that. Unless it was over a space that wasn't covered. So perhaps if it was over some of the contested islands, if the conflict began over contested islands, the United States does not have to address that. So that might pause the U.S. role. But if it certainly involved conflict with Taiwanese military forces and Taiwan itself, likely the United States, regardless of the administration, would likely participate. I do think the question about a Trump presidency and his focus on economic nationalism and going it alone and his tariffs, that it probably in the long term will hurt the United States. And I think Biden sees that as well. Again, I think there is now a general consensus in the United States among political elites that there has to be a harder line taken with China. And I think that a Biden administration will do that as well. So Trump has certainly done that. I mean, Obama did try to do that without a lot of success. And actually the TPP was in part designed to do that as well in terms of constrain and contain China and form an economic partnership with many Southeast Asian nations that the United States would partner with to help develop the this kind of market in the Indo-Pacific that would put some pressure on China to change its behavior. Pulling out of the TPP obviously ceded influence to China in the Indo-Pacific. And I don't think this is in the interests of the United States, and certainly not in the long-term interests of the United States. Now, I do think that it is interesting that so one of the things that Trump can claim that he has been successful at, right, is as some other elites in the United States have said, which is basically that Trump has brought peace and up until COVID prosperity. In fact, Trump is, I think, the first president since Carter to not actually begin a conflict that the United States was involved in, right? Even Obama did in Libya. So Trump is the first president to not actually have intervened abroad using military forces, and has actually brought these, tried to bring troops home. So that there's been a general sense of peace and the absence of conflict abroad under the Trump administration. And up until COVID, obviously the economy was doing quite well. And so many people saw that as a strength of the Trump administration. I'll stop there. If there are other questions I can take.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We have, I believe we have only a few minutes for you to respond. A lot of questions that we have. Let me first acknowledge our colleague from Voice of America. I think her question is very interesting. And how do you think sexism, racism, and nationalism speaks out in this election? Has it gone more serious compared to the previous? We have also questions from our students and other lecturers on whether there will be different reviews on existing trade deals and treaties, which is more important, trade or security for both candidates, and how does the U.S. balance China as a rising power? So I guess with that multiple questions, I'll end there and I'll let you answer.
Yeah, so I think the first question about sexism, racism, and nationalism, clearly those are important forces that are having, I think, important effects on the U.S. electorate and this election, right? Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, the kind of spread of right-wing nationalism in the United States and fear about the rise of white supremacist groups and domestic terrorism, particularly after the attempted kidnapping of the governor of Michigan by a domestic terrorist group. So yeah, I mean, I think many people are quite concerned that the Trump administration has unleashed a variety of forces in the United States that should not be unleashed or need to be addressed and need to be addressed more forcefully, or they don't think that Trump can address these. But I do think these have been, that along with, I think, immigration and refugees has been another element that is hovering over this election as well, right? I mean, the border has been quite contentious, but addressing migrants and immigration and the separation of parents from kids of immigrants that have come to the United States has really galvanized a lot of anti-Trump efforts and opposition to the Trump administration. So I think those things have really been extremely influential and are part of the reason why there's so much interest in this election. All right. So another question was balancing China. And so this clearly is, this has been, I think, the kind of key goal of the United States for many, 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 many years, right? It's to prevent basically the rise of a rising state that can challenge U.S. power in the Pacific region. It was of interest in the United States and in the European region, but also in the Pacific region as well. And I do think that, that for Obama, TPP was one way of doing this. It was one way. I mean, Obama actually did want to reach out to China and actually try to convince China that the U.S. strategy wasn't only to contain China, that we wanted to engage with China and work with China to help solve problems that were confronting both countries, right? That we could work together to solve these problems, be it poverty, be it climate change, be it environmental degradation, whatever it was. Obama did see China, or he thought that China could be a partner. That did not prove to be the case. And in the end, I think that what was left, or what was successful in Obama's Asia pivot, ended up being mostly policies that were containing China, right? So the 60-40 kind of change of U.S. naval forces, 60% moving to the Pacific, obviously designed to contain China. The stationing of Marines in Darwin, Australia, obviously also seen by China as part of a containment strategy. And then, of course, the development of new weapon systems that were continuing as well. This was all part of what China perceives, I think, the United States trying to contain China's expansion and Chinese interests, right? So I do think Biden will do this probably in a different way than Trump, and I think there will be an outreach and a more cooperative effort, and I do think there will be an effort to get the United States in TPP, and that could be used economically to put some pressure on China.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. And I think from the questions that we see in the chat box, everyone would like to pose some other questions. Perhaps if it is okay, Professor Brandon, we'll send these questions through your email so that you can respond to that. So thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for responding to the questions that our audience have and for the insightful presentation. Now I will go straight to our next speaker of the day, Dr. Ben Perkasa Drajat from our Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would like to begin actually by reading out two of the questions in the chat box. From iNews, Ibu Wela basically, again, asked about General Prabowo Subianto's planned visit to the United States. Does it also indicate that there is an intention for increasing security or military relationship between the US and Southeast Asia in the region, and particularly in Indonesia? We have also another question from or Ibu Lazarus Anja from Gajah Mada University. Perhaps you can also address this later after your presentation. This is very particular to Indonesia. We have, perhaps this is also an information to Professor Brandon Prins, we have just recently issued what we call as an omnibus law, which removes investment restrictions. And that includes environmental restrictions as well as some of the safeguards for human rights protection. So how will that affect relations between the US and Indonesia? And with that backdrop, perhaps I'll put Dr. Ben Perkasa in the spot here. Let me invite Dr. Ben Perkasa Drajat from the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Again, 20 minutes for your presentation, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dayu Amudwanti, for the kind of introduction. Thank you very much, Professor Tirta, for inviting me to this excellent event. It is an honor for me to speak here alongside with Professor Brandon Prins, one of the leading well-known scholars in the US. This event indeed is very special for us and for everyone in the world. Firstly, the event of the US election is very popular. It's very important for the US and for all over the world. If we Google US election, there will be more than 700 million items found. And there are more than 10 million news about this election. Secondly, We are now experiencing the biggest unprecedented global change, the biggest in the century, which is the outbreak of coronavirus disease or COVID-19. It has caused not only a global health crisis, but also the development and humanitarian crisis. It needs strong global cooperation to tackle this huge challenge, especially the leadership of major power, including the US. We have already heard Professor Prins' views on how the US election results will influence foreign policy towards this region. In my presentation, I'm going to elaborate US foreign policy in Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia, during President Trump era, and how it will look like in the post-US election era. I will be talking from more from Indonesian perspective, because I'm Indonesian and official of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As a disclaimer, we have more than what I'm going to present, but we cannot release it publicly. It's for the internal use, but we already project some policy, some situation. And then to begin with, and to give the context of this global situation, I'm going to start with this slide. Next slide, please. This map on the screen shows three groupings, or four with Africa, three groupings of global economic power, namely Asia, EU, and North America. It can be seen here that when we talk about Asia-Pacific region, or currently Indo-Pacific region, we are talking about a region with more than 4 billion population and combined GDP of more than 50 trillion US dollar. It goes without saying, both Indonesia and US being part of the strategic landscape, being the member of G20, would focus sizable resources on this region with massive potential that I will explain later on. Then we should go to the next slide, please. I would like now to share with you the Professor Prins already mentioned about this, but I would like to emphasize also, underline the importance of US strategy, especially US military strategy in the region. The United States Indo-Pacific Command, or US Indo-PACOM, has rather long history maintaining its presence in the region. It is the oldest and the largest among the unified combatant command within the US military. On the left, we can see the location of active US naval and air force bases in the region, including in South Korea, Japan, Guam, Australia, and maybe Singapore, which remain as the US closest allies in the region. In more details, we can see on the right part of the screen the breakdown of the development of US Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Force recently. It's very active and very dynamic. This number represents part of the US engagement strategy in the Pacific region, especially in order to balance, if not contain, a certain power in the region. Maybe this illustration can also indirectly reply to the question of why Minister Prabowo went to the United States and what is the discussion is all about. Next, please. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the US foreign policy strategy in the Southeast Asia, which is now part of Indo-Pacific. The term has been changed from Asia-Pacific now into Indo-Pacific, and everybody uses it, including US and Indonesia. The background is, you can see here, that the US as an institution, not the Trump personal performance or personal interest, has multiple interests in the region, including some we have identified here on the screen. In terms of politics and security, US main agenda is very clear:
to preserve peace, to maintain prosperity and stability in the region. This is important. The way the US protect this interest is by encouraging parties to adhere to international law, weeding out threats such as piracy and terrorism, and most recently by supporting the Asian outlook on Indo-Pacific. This is, I'm talking about the general US and bureaucratic US position for the region, not the personal Trump's position on this. In tandem with that, the US economic engagement in the region has intensified, especially during this presidency, the first term of President Donald Trump, with his aim to balance the US trade deficit. And of course, being the global superpower, the US aims to propagate its values, including democracy, human rights, gender equality, and so on, which will be more emphasized if Joe Biden becomes the US president. Next, please. And here the important facts about the US-ASEAN relations. ASEAN is the dynamic and fastest growing organization, the regional organization in the world, and ASEAN plays an important role in the regional and global community for about more than 50 years. In 2015, ASEAN and US agreed to increase the level of cooperation from enhanced partnership to strategic partnership. ASEAN-US summit were held in the period of 2016 to 2019, which President Donald Trump never attended the summit. Next, in terms of trade and investment, we can see also the similar bright outlook. The relationship between the two parties, ASEAN and US, has grown strong, and the tendency is to become stronger and stronger. One indicator to see is the total trade between the two parties. Over the year, the ASEAN-US total trade showed a steady increase. The ASEAN-US trade value last year reached $299.7 billion, increase of 8.4% from the previous year. To further break it down, ASEAN total export to the US last year was $213.3 billion, while the total trade of the other way was $86.4 billion. On top of that, the US is ASEAN's fourth largest source of FDI in 2018 with a total investment of $3.3 billion. Next, please. Now I want to discuss specifically on the Indonesian-US relation from our perspective, from the government of Indonesia's perspective. First of all, the US is one of the most important trade partners in Indonesia, and one of the largest trading partners, and one of the largest source of our trade surplus. For instance, last year, trade volume has reached $27.1 billion, while it is decreased 5.2% as compared to the total trade value the previous year, 2018. If you are looking at the longer period of time, the trade between the two countries show an increasing trend. Meanwhile, on the investment, according to the Indonesian Investment Coordinating Board, BKPM, the US is Indonesia's 8th largest source of FDI in 2019, with total investment of near to $1 billion. This figure is obviously smaller than actual total US investment in Indonesia, because we have yet to take into account portfolio investment and US company subsidiaries investing in Indonesia through third countries. Next, please. So from the perspective of Indonesia, the US is obviously a strategic partner, which constitutes Indonesia's 4th largest trading partner and 8th largest source of investment. On the other hand, from the perspective of the US, Indonesia is a huge potential market with a strong role in the region. This is a current standing of Indonesia's US relation, you can see it here. Next slide. As we all know, this is all about the election, from which we can see from the internet, from open sources anywhere. Yeah. As Professor Prins has rightly mentioned, the prediction for the November 3rd, 2020, 59th US election now is the incumbent President Donald Trump is below the polling. I think around, you're right, around 9, 10, 11, 12 point trailing to Joe Biden. Yeah. It is, of course, our interest, like everyone interest in the world, to closely following the progress of this election. It is very important election. The impact is for everyone in the world. After all, as I have established on the previous slide, the US is our strategic partner and, of course, everybody's strategic partner. Then Biden now leads today. Biden leads the poll with a double-digit figure of 10.7%. Quite a number. However, everybody, Professor Prins, Professor Tirta, lesson learned from the last presidential election in 2016 between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton shows that pool advantage might not translate into real actual results. As such, it remains necessary for us to anticipate both post-election possibility. Next slide, please. Indeed, it is undeniable that there will be idiosyncrasy of who we ever emerge as the US President of the United States. If Joe Biden is going to be 46th President of the United States. We have compiled some key policy differences between the two candidates. Obviously, the presidential candidate, which culminate in lively, if not heated, debate, policy perspective and personal perspective, highlighted some differences between two candidates, including immigration policy, domestic economic policy, healthcare policy, and to some extent, foreign policy. However, there is a major intersection in terms of foreign policy toward in the Pacific region, specifically Southeast Asia and Indonesia, which is our focus today. First of all, this is important, ladies and gentlemen, the US-China relations shall mostly remain status quo. My projection, our projection is whoever going to be the president of the United States, the situation remains the same. Summarizing expert opinion, it is found that President Donald Trump has entered trade war with China and most likely continue whoever will be the president. The sentiment pressure toward China will be observed of both candidates, although it is more likely for Biden different in style. Biden will use multilateral means instead of unilateral acts and gunboat diplomacy. For countries in Southeast Asia, this means big opportunity to increase trade with US. Secondly, the US presence and contribution in the region is likely to be continued. This is especially true in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, Biden is more interested how to maintain cooperation in this pandemic. But in order to safeguard both candidates' constituent interests, especially in the private sector, Southeast Asia has offered alternative for US companies to mitigate their current over-reliance toward China. So what I'm saying is there is a possibility of relocation of the US factories in China to Southeast Asia. It happens to Vietnam, and hope Indonesia will also be the place of relocation. Relocation of industry from China to South Asia is predicted to be bigger, to be more accelerated post-COVID-19. That's number two. Number three, the US will continue its engagement with ASEAN within the framework of ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, or AOIP, which US has endorsed now, being the only regional forum in Southeast Asia encompassing all countries. ASEAN-led mechanism offer a neutral avenue for all powers, especially US and China, to discuss on matters of the region. Communication with ASEAN will remain necessary to the US, whoever the president, no matter who are in the White House in the future. It comes to my closing remarks. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize once again that the US is Indonesia's one of the most important partners, both in bilateral and regional contexts. Likewise, for the US, Indonesia is key player in the region, and it is necessary for the US to maintain friendly relation with Indonesia. It could be displayed, for instance, with the visit of State Secretary of the US to Indonesia and the visit of Indonesia Minister of Defense to the US. Regardless of whoever wins the upcoming president election, US strategy in the region will likely be a continuation from what we have so far, with a lot of rooms for improvement. The room of improvement might be different from Trump presidency or Biden presidency. It remains up to both parties, Indonesia and the US, to explore possibility to strengthen cooperation in order to achieve peace and prosperity in the region. I shall stop here. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ben. I believe that everyone learned from your point of view as practitioner what it means to Southeast Asia and what it means to Indonesia. I will begin with a question that is also echoed by Ibu Netik Indrawati. So Southeast Asian countries, including Indonesia, has been caught between two powerful siblings, so to speak. One, we have the US, and the other end, we have China. As a practitioner, how do you think Southeast Asian countries, including Indonesia, position itself between two powers that are trying to impose their presence in the region? So that is the first question. The other questions that come from the chat box is Galura Yuda, our student, asked about how do you think the omnibus law will affect US-Indonesia relations? We also have questions that are more of the influence of what is happening domestically in the US and the implications to Indonesia and the region. First is the possible appointment of a conservative justice in the US Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett. What does it mean if she gets selected or appointed? The second is, do you think that Donald Trump will try to, perhaps Professor Brandon, if you'd like to come in later, do you think that President Donald Trump will try everything he can to win the election, including manipulating the results? Or if he loses, do you think that he will reject the outcome of the election, and what are the implications to the region and also to Indonesia? We have also another question from Kevin. Do you think that the US will view China differently if Joe Biden is elected? So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Badayu. I'm having problem to see the comments. I don't know where I couldn't open the chat box here, but from what you mentioned, there are two questions I think I would like to conservative justice is a domestic matters, and Donald Trump would like to win in whatever way. Maybe Professor Prins as American can reply for that question. The first question is about the powerful siblings. I don't know whether the term sibling is right. US and China, but I prefer to use the term maybe a partner or competitor, things like that. And how is the position of ASEAN? ASEAN is trying to be honest broker in the relations between more powerful countries, more powerful power. There are two powers here. So it offers, the organization offers some kind of balanced proposal for both China and the US. It is, we can see it from the ASEAN proposal on the Indo-Pacific, in which it is firstly being Indonesian proposal. And it is welcomed by everyone because it doesn't hurt anybody there. Yeah. It doesn't put China on problem. It is slide one power to another. It doesn't want to make hard feeling for anybody in the club. Yeah. So it's a very good choice. It's not. It's a very good compromise to the VOIP proposal from the US and backed up by other US allies, Japan, South Korea, and others with other proposal and China proposal. Yeah, the problem is how to contain, how to balance the US and China competition here, or conflict or friction in the region. It reflects on the situation in the South China Sea situation there. It's a microcosm of the how US-China competition rivalries happen in operational situation is what it happens in the South China Sea situation right now. Of course, US try to attract some non-aligned or neutral countries there, including Indonesia, to side it with the United States, to be in the United States part. This can be seen from offers of the United States, which we reject. Some of the military assistant military cooperation. We don't want to be a military cooperation with anybody. We are non-aligned. Indonesia is non-aligned movement. We are not neutral, but we don't want our soil to be used militarily by foreign powers. Everybody, we are independent on this because we achieve independence with this kind of spirit, and it is stipulated in the constitution, so it is clear. Yeah. Don't try to take Indonesia to this side or that side. That's for the principle. And Indonesia is the largest member, if not to mention the biggest brother in ASEAN, and we play an important role there from the beginning. There is never any ASEAN decision without the agreement of Indonesia. If you don't like one thing, it won't be ASEAN decisions. If we want one thing, and 9 other ASEAN disagree, it's still possible to become ASEAN decision. That's history. So our influence in ASEAN is tremendous, huge, like Donald Trump mentioned, it's very huge. in ASEAN, and so we can play it through ASEAN or bilaterally. It's maybe the impact is quite different, but we can play it both ways. So it's very important, Indonesia, ASEAN, from the US perspective, especially in current situation of there's a possibility of transfer of power, in the United States. On omnibus law, I don't want to speak long about that, but my short remarks is this law is very important to attract investment and to manage our bureaucratic system in Indonesia so we can develop our development. It has controversy now, it creates controversy, and I don't want to jump into that, but I think from the perspective of foreign investor, they will welcome this kind of law. I think that those two questions, Mbak Dayu, that I can answer. Yeah. I don't know, but conservative justice, I know, but it's not my job to reply on other domestic problem in the US.
Right, right. Thank you. So speaking like a true diplomat, Dr. Ben, and I believe you partly answered a question from our colleague on Indonesia's diplomatic influence. I should conclude that Indonesia's diplomatic influence, especially in ASEAN, remains unfaltered to this day. So we have a few minutes left. Professor Brandon Prins, are you still on the line? Are you still with us? I know it's very late.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so great. So we have two questions that are related to the domestic issues. One is, will President Trump do whatever he can to win, and will he accept the outcome of the elections? And to what are the implications of a conservative judge in the Supreme Court?
Yeah. So I think there's no doubt that, in my opinion, that Trump will leave. I mean, if he loses, he leaves. I mean, it might depend a little bit on how close the election is, and whether they're still counting after election day, and then whether Trump challenges those results. I mean, the problem is going to be is that likely there will be a very large Democratic advantage prior to election day because many Democrats and Biden supporters are voting early. And I suspect that many Trump supporters are going to vote on election day. And so it may seem like there's a big Democratic advantage, and then Trump will be gaining, but not gaining enough. And that there's some question about whether or not those votes that came in early are legitimate or something. So is there some possibility? But, we dealt with this in 2000 with Bush v. Gore. I think our institutions are robust enough to handle it if there's a close election. I mean, the electorate is more polarized, and so I'm more worried than I was in 2000 if there is a close election. If there's not an election, he'll leave or he'll be escorted out of the White House by Secret Service. If it is close, then there may be court challenges. So when it comes to the Supreme Court pick, Amy Coney Barrett, yeah, I mean, this is going to certainly have implications for moving forward. She likely will be confirmed next week to the Supreme Court. Of course, that's a lifetime appointment, so conservatives will now hold a 6-3 advantage on the court. And again, this is somewhat, I think many progressives see this as unfair because it reflects a distribution of power in the United States that is unfair, that reflects a really Senate power and not population power. So I do think the implication of her being confirmed to the Senate is it does increase the chances that Joe Biden and Democrats, if they get control of the Senate, will increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court. Right now it's 9. It can be any number based on congressional authorization. And so it may be that Democrats change the number of justices on the court. I also think it does increase the chances that both Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico become states in the United States, because that will increase the number of reliable Democratic senators by 4. So I do think both of those things are increasingly likely as Amy Cody Barrett goes on the court.
Thank you. We have a question from Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, very quick one. So is there a possibility for the US under both candidates to ratify the UNCLOS, especially with geopolitical dynamics in East Asia?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I don't think there's any chance it would be ratified by Trump if Trump wins re-election. I think Biden would support it. I mean, the United States mostly adheres to most UNCLOS rules and regulations already. So the only question is whether there would be sufficient support in the Senate for advice and consent to ratification. If Democrats win, that will certainly be a higher probability than if Republicans retain control. And so I think there's a decent chance that the United States both joins UNCLOS and both joins a comprehensive test ban treaty.
Thank you. So there is hope after all, I believe. So thank you so much, Professor Brandon Prins and Dr. Ben Perkasa Drajat. So everyone, please join me in giving a virtual round of applause to our both distinguished speakers. We would like to also express our heartful and sincere thank you and appreciation, especially for Professor Brandon, who is staying up really late in US time. And basically, I would like to thank the audience for staying with us towards the end and for being very active, both in the chat box and also in our social media. Don't forget the hashtags IRLS, CBDS, US election. So I believe on behalf of the Center for Business and Diplomacy Studies of International Relations, Bina Nusantara University, we have showcased that our discussion today as part of International Relations lecture series serves as forum to connect scholars, practitioners, media, and also everyone who is interested in talking about and discussing analytically on current affairs that matters to all of us. So we hope that you can all participate in more lecture series to come, and also subscribe to our social media, and also please look at our website for latest topics, latest analytics, and also publications. So with that positive note, I know Halloween is coming and it's a big thing in the US. It's not all gloom, a picture it seems. It's not horrific. So we believe that there is light at the end of the tunnel, whoever gets elected. So we will be watching very closely what happens in the US election. So thank you again, Professor Brandon Prins. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you to Dr. Ben Perkasa Drajat as well from the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And with that, let me invite Emily to close the session today.
Thank you.
Thank you.